In the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, they saw just another quiet black teacher. Soft-spoken, unassuming, easy target. What they didn't know was that behind those gentle eyes burned the soul of a warrior, a woman who once commanded respect in dojos across 3 states, a champion who walked away from everything after one devastating night. But when cruel students crossed the line, when they took scissors to her sacred braids in front of 30 laughing faces, they awakened something that had been sleeping for 7 long years. Some mistakes you can't take back. What would you do if they tried to humiliate you in front of everyone you're trying to help? Maya Johnson walked through the halls of Riverside High like a ghost. At 32, she carried herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to make herself small. Her natural hair was woven into intricate braids that fell past her shoulders. Each one, a meditation, a connection to her grandmother's patient hands. Students barely glanced at her as she passed. To them, she was just another substitute teacher. Forgettable, harmless, a woman who spoke in whispers and flinched when voices were raised. Her classroom was sparse, deliberately so. No family photos smiled from her desk. No certificates proclaimed her achievements on the walls, just textbooks, lesson plans, and a small wooden box she kept locked in her bottom drawer. The box was mahogany, worn smooth by decades of handling, its brass hinges tarnished with age. Inside lay remnants of another life. Another woman who had once stood tall and proud before the world bowed to her power. Maya's voice was gentle when she spoke to her students. Never rising above a careful whisper, she never showed anger, never displayed the fire that once burned so bright it consumed everything in its path. Even when they talked through her lessons about the civil rights movement, even when they rolled their eyes at her stumbling attempts to connect with their generation, she remained patient, kind, broken, some might say. Though Maya preferred to think of herself as reformed, her principal, Mrs. Davidson, had warned her during that first awkward interview that these kids were challenging. What she really meant was that they smelled weakness the way sharks smell blood in the water. And they were right to sense it. Maya had deliberately made herself weak, had chosen vulnerability over strength, gentleness over the devastating power that had once defined her existence. She had learned that some victories came at too high a price, that some battles left winners and losers both destroyed. But sometimes, late at night in her empty apartment, Maya would stand before her bathroom mirror and allow her body to remember. Her movements would become fluid, precise, deadly. Muscle memory that 7 years of deliberate forgetting couldn't erase completely. A perfect kata sequence would flow through her limbs like water, finding its natural course. Then she would catch herself, ashamed of the pleasure she felt in that remembered power, and return to grading papers with hands that trembled not from weakness, but from the effort of containing the storm within. Now she taught American history to teenagers who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle between themselves and summer vacation. She preferred it that way. Safe, invisible, anonymous. The woman who had once made headlines across 3 states had become a footnote in the daily lives of people who would never know her name or understand what she had sacrificed to stand before them. Vulnerable and human, and desperately hoping for redemption. The nightmare always began the same way. Bright lights blazing down from the ceiling of the Richmond Sports Arena, 800 people on their feet, their voices blending into a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. 17-year-old Maya Johnson, regional champion, stepping onto the mat with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Her opponent, Tommy Richardson, a college freshman who outweighed her by 40 pounds and had never lost to a girl, sneered as he took his position. The crowd loved an underdog story, but they had no idea they were about to witness something that would haunt them for years to come. Maya had been unstoppable that night, a force of nature wrapped in a white gi that seemed to glow under the arena lights. 3 years of training under Master Chen had refined her natural talent into something approaching perfection. She absorbed every technique, every philosophy, every breath of discipline the old Chinese master offered. Her grandmother had driven 4 hours from her small town to watch, sitting in the front row with tears of pride streaming down her weathered face. She had raised Maya after her parents died in a car accident, had scraped together the money for lessons, had believed in her granddaughter's potential when no one else would. The first 2 rounds belonged to Maya completely. Her speed was supernatural. Her precision, mathematical. Her ability to turn an opponent's strength against them was poetry written in motion. Tommy grew frustrated, then angry, then reckless. He had come to the tournament expecting an easy victory, had bragged to his fraternity brothers about how he would put the little black girl in her place. The crowd's growing excitement at Maya's dominance only fueled his rage. In the 3rd round, he came at her with everything he had. Abandoning technique for raw aggression, Maya could have ended it cleanly, could have used any number of approved techniques to secure her victory. But she was drunk on power that night, intoxicated by the roar of the crowd and the look of fear in Tommy's eyes. She decided to end it with a move Master Chen had specifically forbidden her to use in competition, a spinning heel kick that was beautiful in its execution and devastating in its impact. The technique was perfect, textbook form, flawless timing, delivered with the full force of her 130 pounds behind it. Tommy never saw it coming. The kick caught him in the temple with the force of a sledgehammer, and he dropped like a stone cut from its string. The crowd went silent. Then came the sirens, the paramedics, the frantic radio chatter about brain trauma and surgical intervention. Maya stood over Tommy's motionless body, her hands still in fighting position. While her world collapsed around her in slow motion, Tommy survived, but barely. 3 weeks in intensive care, followed by months of rehabilitation that would never fully restore what Maya had taken from him. The doctors said he would never be the same. His left side remained partially paralyzed, his speech forever slurred. His dreams of a full scholarship to Duke University dying on that mat, along with Maya's championship aspirations. She had won the tournament, but the victory felt like ashes in her mouth. The lawsuits came next, a cascade of legal papers that buried Maya's family in debt and shame. Tommy's parents sued everyone they could find. Maya, the tournament organizers, even Master Chen, for training what they called a weapon disguised as a teenage girl. The local news painted Maya as a violent aggressor who had used excessive force against a helpless victim. Death threats appeared in her family's mailbox. Someone spray-painted the word killer across her grandmother's car in bright red letters that looked like blood in the moonlight. It started small at Riverside High, the way cruelty always does. A few snickers when Maya mispronounced a student's name during roll call, eye rolls when she fumbled with the projector controls, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to focus the image on the screen. Jessica Martinez, a popular girl with perfectly straightened hair and a smile that could cut glass, whispered just loud enough for half the class to hear. Miss Johnson don't know nothing about nothing. The other students tittered like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Maya pretended not to notice, but she felt each laugh like a physical blow. Week by week, the disrespect grew bolder, more creative in its cruelty. They called her Substitute Sally behind her back, sometimes to her face. When she turned to write on the whiteboard, paper airplanes sailed past her head like tiny missiles. During her carefully prepared lessons about the civil rights movement, Brandon Cox, a Ballet, privileged boy whose father owned 3 car dealerships, raised his hand with mock innocence that fooled no one. Miss Johnson, were you actually there when this stuff happened? You know, back in the old days? The class erupted in laughter that sounded like breaking glass. Maya's hand tightened around her marker until her knuckles went white. But she kept her voice steady, professional. I was not alive during the 1960s. Brandon, I'm only 32 years old. More laughter. Louder this time. She realized her mistake immediately. She had defended herself, had shown them that their words could wound her. The administration treated Maya like a necessary evil, someone to babysit the difficult classes, While the real teachers handled advanced placement students bound for prestigious universities, Principal Davidson spoke to her in the tone one might use with a particularly slow child, explaining obvious things with exaggerated patience. During faculty meetings, conversations stopped when Maya entered the room, resuming only after she found a seat in the back corner where she could be safely ignored. Mrs. Patterson, a veteran English teacher with 30 years of experience and a reputation for telling it like it is, cornered Maya after a particularly brutal faculty meeting. The older woman's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds as she delivered her assessment. "Honey, I don't know what kind of schools you worked at before, but these kids need structure, discipline. They can smell fear, and frankly, you reek of it." Her laugh was like the sound of ice cracking under pressure. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March that started like any other day. Maya was teaching her fourth period class about Reconstruction when she noticed the whispered planning in the back row. Jessica, Brandon, and their crew of 6 popular students were huddled together, phones hidden under their desks, faces lit with the kind of malicious excitement that preceded something terrible. Maya should have stopped class right there. Should have confiscated the phones. You should have sent them to the office for the administrative discipline. She was too gentle to impose herself. Instead, she kept teaching because deep down Maya still believed she could reach them, still believed that education and patience could overcome hatred and ignorance, still believed in the gentle power of second chances. Even as her grandmother's voice whispered warnings from beyond the grave, she was explaining the economic impact of sharecropping when Brandon stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Yo, Miss Johnson, I got a question for you." The class fell silent with the anticipation of an audience waiting for a performance they knew would end in blood. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always preceded humiliation, but she nodded with professional courtesy. "Of course. Brandon, what would you like to know about the Reconstruction era?" Her voice was steady, but her heart was racing like a hummingbird's wings. "I was wondering," he said, glancing at his co-conspirators for encouragement. "Is it true that back in slave times, they used to cut off black people's hair to shame them? Like, make them feel less human or whatever?" Maya's blood went cold. She could see the trap opening beneath her feet, could read the malicious intent in his smirking expression, but she was caught by her own principles, her commitment to education over confrontation. "Well, yes. Historically, there were many ways that enslaved people were dehumanized, including..." She began, but Jessica was already moving. The girl had positioned herself directly behind Maya's chair during the conversation, scissors gleaming in her hand like a blade waiting to fall. In one swift motion, she grabbed a handful of Maya's carefully braided hair and brought the scissors down with the decisive snap of metal meeting keratin. The sound of cutting filled the classroom like a death rattle, soft, rhythmic snips that seemed to echo forever in the sudden silence. Maya felt the weight leave her head, felt her grandmother's hours of patient work falling to the floor like broken promises. The class erupted in cheers and applause that sounded like thunder. Phones appeared from everywhere, recording her shock, her pain, her complete and utter humiliation for the entertainment of strangers. "Oops," Jessica said, holding up 6 inches of severed braids like a trophy won in battle. "My bad. Miss Johnson, guess you'll have to find yourself a new style. Maybe something more professional this time." The laughter was deafening, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. Someone had already started uploading videos to social media platforms. By lunch, the entire school would know. By evening, it would be everywhere. Maya stood frozen, one hand instinctively reaching for the back of her head where ragged ends remained like the stumps of amputated limbs. The humiliation was complete, total, devastating in its public nature. "Sight down. Jessica," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chaos. "Please, just sit down and let me teach." But Jessica was drunk on power now, playing to her audience like an actor on opening night. "What Miss Johnson? I can't hear you over here. Maybe if you actually spoke up for once in your pathetic life, people might show you some respect. She dropped the severed braids at Maya's feet and kicked them toward the trash can like garbage. There. Now you look more like a real teacher, instead of some wannabe African princess. The room fell silent as 30 teenagers waited to see what their weak, forgettable substitute would do next. That night, Maya sat in her bathroom, staring at the severed braids spread across the white countertop. In the harsh fluorescent light, the damage looked even worse than it had in the classroom. 7 years of growth. Her grandmother's final gift. Reduced to broken strands that would never be whole again. Each braid had been a meditation. A connection to ancestors who had survived worse than this. A crown of dignity in a world that seemed determined to strip away her worth. She had already typed the resignation letter on her phone. 2 sentences that would end her brief career in education. Professional, clean, no mention of what had happened or why she was leaving. Just another substitute teacher who couldn't handle the job, couldn't command respect, couldn't survive in a world that demanded strength she no longer possessed. The story they expected her to tell. Her phone buzzed with notifications she couldn't bring herself to read. The videos had gone viral, spreading across the internet like wildfire. Thousands of strangers now knew her shame, had witnessed her humiliation, were probably laughing at the pathetic woman who couldn't even defend herself from a teenage girl with scissors. The comments would be worse than the footage. She knew. Hundreds of people calling her weak, unfit, a failure as a teacher and as a woman. Maya stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror and hardly recognized the person looking back. The uneven stumps where her beautiful braids had been made, her look like a different person entirely. Broken, defeated, exactly what they wanted her to be. She opened the wooden box with trembling fingers and pulled out her grandmother's tournament medal, the gold now tarnished with age, but still heavy with meaning. The old woman had been 73 when she competed. The only black participant in a field of suburban housewives who thought they were humoring an elderly woman's delusion, Maya remembered watching from the stands as her grandmother faced down opponent after opponent, with quiet dignity and devastating precision. The other women had underestimated her completely, had seen only an old black woman playing dress-up in a martial arts uniform. They learned better quickly. Maya's grandmother moved like water, flowed like silk, struck like lightning. She dismantled each opponent with surgical precision, never using more force than necessary, never showing anger or cruelty, just pure, controlled power in service of something larger than personal glory. When she won the tournament, the applause was thunderous, but Maya remembered most clearly the look of stunned respect on faces that had been smugly dismissive just hours before. Maya closed her eyes and felt something stir in her chest. Something that had been sleeping for 7 long years. Something that remembered what it felt like to be powerful, to be feared, to command respect through sheer force of will and undeniable skill. She looked at the resignation letter on her phone screen, her finger hovering over the send button. One tap and she could disappear again. Find another city, another school, another chance to be invisible and safe. Instead, she deleted the draft and began to plan. Maya arrived at school early the next morning. Before the first bus pulled into the parking lot with its cargo of unsuspecting teenagers, she wore her damaged hair in a simple ponytail, the uneven ends hidden, but not forgotten. Her movements had changed overnight, become more deliberate, more centered. The careful shuffle of the defeated woman was gone, replaced by the measured stride of someone who had made a decision that would change everything. She rearranged her classroom with mathematical precision, desks in a perfect circle with no hiding places, no back row sanctuary for cowards. The wooden box sat open on her desk for the first time, its contents finally displayed like artifacts in a museum. The newspaper clipping with its bold headline about championship glory, the black belt worn thin from years of training, her grandmother's medal catching the morning light like a promise. Let them see what they had awakened. The 4th period class filed in with predatory excitement, their faces bright with anticipation. Word had spread about yesterday's incident through the school's social networks, and they came expecting another show, another opportunity to humiliate the weak substitute teacher who couldn't defend herself. Jessica strutted to her seat like a conquering hero, high-fiving her supporters and basking in the attention her cruelty had earned. Brandon had his phone out already, hoping to catch the sequel to their viral moment. They had tasted blood in the water and wanted more. He wanted to see just how far they could push before their victim finally broke completely. Maya stood in the center of the circle, hands clasped behind her back, and waited for the chatter to die down. When it didn't, she simply continued waiting, her presence somehow filling the room like smoke. "Good morning," she said quietly, and the room fell silent immediately, not from respect, but from a primitive recognition that something fundamental had changed. The woman standing before them was not the same person they had humiliated yesterday. She held herself differently, moved with a fluid grace that suggested coiled power waiting to be unleashed. Her voice carried an edge they had never heard before, cold and sharp as winter wind. "Before we begin today's lesson," she continued, walking slowly around the circle like a predator marking territory, "I want to thank Jessica for yesterday's demonstration." Jessica blinked in confusion, her confident smile faltering. This wasn't the script she had expected, wasn't the breakdown she had come to witness. "You taught this class a very important lesson about power," Maya said, her eyes never leaving Jessica's face, "about what happens when we mistake gentleness for weakness." Maya moved to her desk and picked up the black belt, letting it unfurl to its full length. The worn fabric seemed to ripple with hidden energy, and several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "You see, I used to be someone else," she said, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the room. "Someone who believed that strength meant hurting people, someone who confused dominance with discipline, someone who forgot that true power comes from control, not from proving you can destroy another human being." She held up the newspaper clipping, turning it so everyone could see the headline and the photograph of a younger Maya, fierce and proud, holding a trophy above her head. The image didn't match their conception of their weak, pathetic substitute teacher. This was someone else entirely, someone who looked like she could take apart everyone in the room without breaking a sweat. "I put a boy in the hospital," Maya said matter-of-factly, letting the words hang in the air like a sword. 17 years old. "Just like some of you. I destroyed his future because I forgot that real power requires restraint." The classroom had gone completely silent now, 30 teenagers suddenly aware that they were in the presence of something dangerous. Maya set the clipping down gently and picked up her grandmother's medal, letting it catch the light as she spoke. "I spent 7 years learning to be gentle, learning to be kind, learning to turn the other cheek and swallow my pride and let people treat me like I was nothing. I thought that was what being good meant. I thought that was what redemption looked like. But yesterday," Maya continued, her gaze finding Jessica's terrified face, "you taught me something very important. You taught me that there's a difference between choosing to be gentle and being weak, between showing mercy and enabling cruelty, between being kind and being a victim." Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried the weight of absolute conviction. Maya walked to the center of the circle again, her movements flowing like water. "So I'm going to offer you the same choice I offered Tommy Richardson 7 years ago," she said, and the name hit the room like a physical blow. Several students were frantically typing on their phones, searching for the story they were beginning to realize they should have known all along. "You can apologize, sincerely and publicly, the same way you humiliated me. Or you can double down on disrespect, and I'll teach you a different kind of lesson." Jessica looked around desperately for support from her friends, but their faces had gone pale with understanding. Someone had found the news articles about the Richmond Sports Arena incident, about the girl who had walked away from championship glory after nearly killing an opponent with a single kick. The viral videos of yesterday's haircutting suddenly seemed less like entertainment and more like evidence of assault against someone who could break bones with her bare hands. "You're threatening me," Jessica said, but her voice cracked like ice under pressure. "I'll tell Principal Davidson. I'll get you fired. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of teacher you really are." Her bravado was paper thin now, barely concealing the fear that was beginning to eat at her from the inside. Maya smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression any of them had ever seen. Cold, calculating, the smile of someone who had looked into the abyss and found it lacking. "Tell her what?" "Exactly?" she asked, taking a single step closer. "That I offered you a choice between dignity and consequences? That I'm finally teaching you about respect and accountability?" Her voice remained soft, conversational, but there was steel underneath the silk. "Or maybe you'd prefer to tell her how you assaulted a teacher with scissors while your friends recorded it for their entertainment? How you destroyed something that took years to grow because you thought cruelty was funny? How you tried to humiliate someone who was showing you more restraint than you deserved?" Maya's eyes never left Jessica's face, and the girl seemed to shrink under the weight of that stare. "Choose quickly," Maya said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "because my patience, the kind I've been showing you for months, just ran out. And you really don't want to see what I'm like when I stop being nice." The room was dead silent now. 30 teenagers suddenly understanding that they were not the predators in this story. They were prey, and they had just awakened something that had been sleeping for 7 long years. Jessica looked into Maya's eyes and saw her own reflection, small and cruel and utterly powerless against someone who had finally remembered what she was capable of. The girl who had strutted into class like a conquering hero suddenly realized she was nothing more than a bully who had picked the wrong target. Her hands shook as she spoke, her voice barely audible above the sound of her own racing heartbeat. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words coming out broken and desperate. "I'm so sorry. Miss Johnson, I was wrong. I was cruel and stupid, and I'm sorry. Please, I'm really, really sorry." The apology hung in the air like smoke, and Maya studied the girl's face for a long moment before nodding once, satisfied that the lesson had been learned. 3 months later, Maya's classroom had become the most requested assignment in the school. Students who had once mocked her now competed for seats in her sections, drawn by something they couldn't quite name but desperately wanted to understand. The change wasn't born from fear, though that had certainly played a role in the beginning. It came from something more powerful and more lasting: respect. Principal Davidson, who had once dismissed Maya as a temporary inconvenience, now showcased her classes to visiting district officials. "Remarkable transformation," she would say, conveniently forgetting her earlier doubts about the quiet substitute teacher. Real leadership in action. Maya never corrected the record, never revealed the true story of her past or the moment when everything changed. She simply taught, and her students learned, and the school became a better place for everyone. Maya still kept the wooden box on her desk, but now it served a different purpose. Students would ask about the newspaper clipping, the black belt, the tarnished medal. She would tell them about Tommy Richardson, about the price of uncontrolled power, about her grandmother's tournament victory, and the lessons that could only be learned through pain. Real lessons that couldn't be found in any textbook. Wisdom that came from walking through fire and choosing to emerge as something better than what you were before. On the last day of school, a quiet girl named Keisha approached Maya's desk with hesitant steps. She had been one of the silent witnesses to Jessica's assault, too timid to intervene, but disturbed by what she had seen. "Miss Johnson," she said softly, "I want to learn what you know. About being strong but not mean. About standing up for yourself without hurting people. About being powerful but still being good." Maya smiled and reached into her desk drawer, pulling out a business card that had been sitting there unused for 7 years. Master Chen had rebuilt his dojo across town after learning about Maya's transformation, ready to train a new generation. in the true meaning of martial arts. Tell him I sent you, Maya said, pressing the card into Keisha's palm. Tell him you want to learn about power with purpose, about strength with honor, about the difference between being a warrior and being a weapon. As the final students filed out for summer vacation, Maya began packing her classroom. Not because she was leaving. She had signed a permanent contract for the fall. But because she was finally ready to fully inhabit the space she had claimed, the wooden box would go home with her tonight. Its contents no longer shameful secrets, but honored memories of a journey that had led her exactly where she needed to be. Jessica stopped in the doorway. Hesitant. The girl had become one of Maya's most dedicated students. After that March morning, her cruelty transformed into curiosity. Her need to hurt others, replaced by a genuine desire to understand herself. Miss Johnson, she said quietly, thank you for not giving up on us, for showing us what real strength looks like, for teaching us that being good doesn't mean being weak. Maya looked up from her boxes and nodded, her smile warm, but her eyes still carrying that edge of steel that had changed everything. Kindness is not weakness, Jessica, but neither is standing up for yourself. Remember that. The girl nodded and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway like a promise. Outside, summer stretched ahead with infinite possibility. The sun was setting over Charlotte, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Maya of her grandmother's favorite scarf. She locked her classroom door and walked toward the parking lot, her steps measured and confident. Behind her, the school settled into the quiet peace that comes when bullies learn that their victims might not be as helpless as they appear. Some battles are won, not with power, but with dignity. Some victories are measured not in conquered enemies, but in transformed hearts. And sometimes, the greatest strength comes not from never falling down, but from choosing to stand back up as someone better than you were before. If you were Hare, would you have found the courage to forgive?